Our work is rooted in our core vision and mission of creating a world where women and girls can live free from violence and discrimination and can fully realize their potential. This webinar series is also part of Ilitha Labantu's ongoing engagement on critical issues related to our mission. We aim to bring together thought leaders, activists, and community members to share insights, discuss challenges, and explore innovative solutions to some of the most pressing issues facing women and girls today. Today's webinar will explore how traditional cultural practices can be effectively integrated with modern strategies to combat gender-based violence. Also, this session will focus on understanding the strength of both traditional and modern approaches. Funding, common ground, and developing collaborative methods that respect cultural heritage while addressing the urgent need to eliminate gender-based violence. Today's topic, it's bringing the gap, integrating traditional practices with modern approaches to combat gender-based violence. We have, as our panelists and speakers that will be following the sequence that we are going to be calling upon, we have got uNomcebo Mgenge, who is a social worker at Ilitha Labantu, who attained her degree at the Nelson Mandela University and has over 4 years experience in the field of victim empowerment, empowering survivors of violence in a micro, meso, and macro level. She is an accredited facilitator as well as an assessor with HWSETA, the Health and Welfare SETA, and has been actively facilitating trainings and workshops for survivors, communities, and frontline workers on issues around violence against women and children. We will be introducing the panelists as we are going to be calling on them. And it would be appreciated if we could be mindful of time because we would like to have all the participants also engaging on issues. But the participants will be allowed after all the panelists have been have engaged on the topics that they're going to be talking about. Over to you, Nomcebo.
Everyone.
I'm sorry, Nomcebo, your signal is pretty bad.
Good morning to the fellow panelists and the participants. All
Much
protocol
better.
is observed. My name is Nomcebo Mgenge, as Mamdutu has introduced. I am a social now. Speaker, can you hear me?
Yes, but your signal is very, very bad. It's breaking up quite easily.
Oh, I wonder because I'm using my phone to connect to the internet.
But continue, and we shall highlight if there are any further issues. Hi, Sis Dutu. I think we were having issues with Unomgebo. I believe we should start with one of the other guests, rather.
We are now sorry about that. We will reconnect with Unomgebo as we go along. We are inviting to the webinar, this particular space, Umbuyiselo Border, who's a founder of South African National Men's Forum. He worked as a commissioner at the Commission for Gender Equality from 1st of January 2014 to 31st of March 2024. He worked for gender justice as its communication specialist. He is a columnist for various newspapers. He holds an honors degree from the University of South Africa and is now busy with his master's degree. Umbuyiselo has got 4 children who are adults, 1 boy and 3 girls. He lives in Pretoria with his life partner, Namhla Gugulethu Ntuli. We are welcoming you, Umbuyiselo Botha, to share your insights about the traditional practices that have to be discussed in line with wishes to have Western practices also integrated. Over to you. Okay.
Good afternoon, moderator. I hope I am clear because I'm on the road. I hope you are able to pick up and to hear me. I just wanted to say also to thank the organizers, in particular, Mrs. Mandisa, to thank her for her work. I mean, as a founder of Ilitha Labantu, just to say that this is one organization that has been a torchbearer in this work, and herself in particular, for her vision and what she continues to do. But having have said that, I thought I must start by saying that Ilitha Labantu has done things that were not necessarily traditional. I mean, Ilitha Labantu, I would be in Cape Town on many occasions where Ilitha would have your take back the night. These are non-conventional, non-traditional interventions that in South Africa, Ilitha Labantu had been among the first, if not the only ones, that have risked in the midst of violence in Cape Town, but it would go ahead and do and do these campaigns. So I thought I should foreground what I'm saying, but the work that Ilitha has been doing for all of these years. But having have said that, in my presentation now, I looked at um, the traditional, and I thought one could zoom in and talk about what in all the ethnic groups in South Africa we have. You have the Sotho who talk about Lebollo, Ukoluka and Xhosa. You talk in Sepedi, we are coming, Kapoya Tabing. Now, all of those are, in fact, the focus is on men. Now, I think it's important that as South Africans and men in particular going in those spaces, that we work together with traditional leaders who themselves have got boys, have got girls. And in South Africa, our traditional leaders are in fact amenable. They are open to these strategies um, working with NGOs like Ilitha Labantu. So I thought that
Oh, Mr. Porter, we are also losing you in regards to your signal. Mr. Porter?
I think as Siku and the members, okay, we are going to be going back to Unomcebo whilst we're trying to reconnect with Umbuyiselo. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies about the network issues that happened earlier. All protocol is observed. My name is Nomcebo. I am a social worker at Ilitha Labantu. As I was preparing for this webinar, I came across a quote by Graham Michelle that says, "Violence is the breast milk that we feed our young," which is illustrating that young people are facing GBV and they are brought up in the midst of the consequences of GBV that is not adequately dealt with. So the issue of gender-based violence affects people of diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnicity, culture, age, and gender, and locations, which then means that survivors seek support and services through different channels. Support services may be formal, which includes the healthcare services, psychosocial support services, SAPS, and other support services can include informal services that include family interventions, traditional leaders, and traditional healers. So if we look back at the can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Nomcebo.
Okay. So if we look back at the ways that GBV was addressed in the olden days, it is very different to how it is addressed currently. Our old African cultural traditions that existed in rural areas, they never condoned GBV. In fact, they encouraged respect and towards women and in marital relationships. And often women, when they were heard crying or in the olden days, neighbors would come out to attend. Unlike nowadays where people turn a blind eye and it's a matter of each to their own. So in the olden days, families were very involved in resolving GBV related issues. They were very involved even from the start of a relationship. I was told that in the olden days, when a man is ready for marriage, they would go to their elders and state that they are ready to take a woman into marriage. And when that happens, a sister of that man would have to go and approach the woman that the man likes in the community. And it just shows the level of involvement that families had in the olden days, even from the courtship. And families would, when the woman then agrees to be part of this relationship, the families would negotiate, they would sit down and negotiate, and there would be dowry required from the man's side. And it was never a means of selling a woman to the man or to the man's family, but it was a process that required families to be together or to get to know each other and build relationships. Now, in cases where there was GBV or in incidents where GBV arose in those relationships, the wife would then have to report to the family members of the husband and family members of that she comes from, and then they would sit down and have discussions as family, and a decision would be made on behalf of the woman. and the men would then be condemned and take accountability through a process called inhlawulo. Inhlawulo would require the men to either buy a cow for the family of the wife, or pay money to the wife's family, because when a man hits a woman, it was regarded that he was hitting the family of the woman. So in the olden days, it was through mediation and through negotiation ways in which GBV, gender-based violence, was addressed. I remember growing up, there was a simple poem that we used to recite called Unomathemba. So Unomathemba is a poem it's a dialogue between older woman and a young woman, where a old woman asks what happened to Nomathemba. Nomathemba points at a man, saying that he's the one who hit her. And then when the older woman asks her to go get the man, Nomathemba declines. And when the old woman says, "Here's a horse, take the horse, go to the man," and Nomathemba continued to say she is lazy to do that. So the older woman would responded by saying that she felt hopeless and did not see that there was a way to help Nomathemba. And it was of recent that I learned that that poem was an illustration of power dynamics, of how men exerted power on women, and women did not have the agency to take steps into seeking help. And such habits and ideals tend to promote GBV, unequal opportunities, sex exploitation, and sexual exploitations. So moving to the current times in terms of how GBV is dealt with by traditional leaders and traditional healers. So when it comes to traditional leaders address GBV through consultations, one-on-one consultations, where a survivor goes to the traditional healer and explains what had happened. And they help the survivor through processes of cleansing, or sometimes the survivor would go to the traditional healer to ask for a way to revenge the incident that happened. So a traditional healer will then use some ways or methods that would make the perpetrator pay for what he's done. Traditional leaders involve families a lot, and families are the ones that end up making decisions for the survivors. And what has been interesting to observe as a social worker is that the cultural belief systems influence survivors to report. So sometimes, because of the cultural belief system, survivors do not report cases of GBV, especially when it has emerged in the family setting. And in most indigenous communities, you find that when a woman reports a rape incident by her husband, she would be told that she should negotiate in private and not inform other people. And in that type of intervention, it does not guarantee that the incident wouldn't reoccur in future. Now, as a social worker that works at Ilitha Labantu, we receive a number of cases that are of GBV, where a client walks in and has been physically abused, emotionally abused, and financially abused, and they are experiencing psychological trauma, emotional trauma, and physical trauma from the abuse. So as social workers in universities, we are taught to use modern approaches. We have methodologies and guidelines that we use to guide us when we are providing intervention for a client. So when a client walks in at Ilitha Labantu, we have a clinical handbook that is a code of conduct for social services in the organization. It states the theories that we can use as guidelines and make reference to when we're providing interventions for survivors. So when a survivor walks in at Ilitha Labantu, and they report a GBV incident, the first thing that we do a risk assessment, where we assess we ask questions and we'll try to gain information on the extent of the abuse, how long has the abuse been happening, the level of threats that the survivor is receiving, is the survivor safe to go back home, would the survivor need a shelter? And in the case where there is a shelter needed for the survivors, we then explore if the survivor has family members that they can go to where they can feel safe in that setting. And if not, we then take the option of the shelter. And when we do the shelter assessment, we have to have the survivor has to have a good exit plan where they have to stay after 3 months, because shelters do not accommodate long-term stays. So if a survivor says they would want to be in a shelter, we then have to assess where would they go if they leave our shelter, what would happen to them if they leave the shelter. So while at the shelter, the survivor receives legal support, they receive psychosocial support from social workers, and they are also able to be signed in a program, skills developmental program that we often run in the organization, where a survivor would be empowered with skills of doing nails, being a nail technician, skills of beading, and so forth, so that by the time they are able to leave the shelter, they are walking out with a transitioned mindset, an empowered mindset that enables them to be self-sufficient and no longer be in need of the perpetrators or of the perpetrator's help. So as social workers, we most of the time rely on what the client is at, where the client is at, basically. So if a client walks in and says to me as a social worker, I believe that if I go to a traditional healer, I will get the help that I need. So we do not tell people what to do. However, we work with what they have. So what they are presenting to us. So if a client says that they think that the best way to deal with the situation is by going to a traditional healer, and they are not able to withstand the length that it takes for the perpetrator to be held accountable through legal procedures, then we do not stand against their decisions to take such steps. And I think as social workers, for us to integrate the traditional practices to modern approaches, it's important that we ensure that we have theories, African-centered theories, that can be placed alongside the existing theories that we work with as social workers, so that we can be able to understand the ills faced by African people and be able to provide intervention to them in a way that will be helpful for them. And other ways we can work with traditional healers, traditional leaders, is by education and awareness. So at Ilitha Labantu, we already have an outreach and education team that coordinates motorcades. So when we go out to communities, we ensure that traditional leaders are present, counselors are there, pastors are there, to show that it's not just Ilitha Labantu fighting against gender-based violence, but it's also the traditional leaders within the community that are standing up against GBV issues. And for us to integrate, it's also important to look at cultural sensitivity in interventions. So we must promote cultural sensitivity, cultures that are not condoning GBV, provided that those cultures are not harmful practices. Because in some cultures, there are harmful practices that exist, such as genital mutilation, where women, and also women when they are forced to be married at a young age. So we will promote cultural sensitivity in interventions and involve community leaders, including political leaders, when going out and making awarenesses. And then having collaboration with local organizations. So other organizations that are within the space that we are based at, having a united front to show that we are all standing up against the scourge of GBV. Cultural exchange as well is one of the ways in which we can ensure that we work together with traditional leaders, with traditional healers, where we facilitate cultural exchange programs and dialogue between communities to foster understanding and respect for diverse perspectives on gender-based violence. And another way we can use is traditional dispute resolutions, where we encourage traditional dispute resolutions mechanisms by promoting gender equality, respect for human rights, while respecting cultural practices. And lastly, another way we can use to ensure that we integrate the ways that the formal and informal ways of intervening and ending GBV is when we continuously monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of the interventions that we have established and that we have implemented, and adapt them as needed to ensure that they are culturally sensitive, effective in addressing gender-based violence. So in ending, I would like to just say that we are all leaders in our respective fields, whether you are a traditional leader, whether you are a person that is working in the formal sector. So it is our responsibility and our actions to show strength to people, not to give up, given to any of the circumstances that we are faced with. So if we hold hands together, there is nothing we cannot overcome. I believe that there is nothing beyond our means that we wouldn't be able to achieve, provided that we are all working together for the betterment of our community and ending the scourge of GBV. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nomcebo. You have mentioned quite a number of issues that really need to be interrogated so that we can start looking at what is it that we can hold on that was a traditional cultural practice in the prevention of GBV to those that are used by the Western side and all that, the legal rules and all that. But we will come back to you after all the other practitioners, the panelists and participants were preparing to write their comments as well as their questions so that we can consolidate responses that are going to be directed at you. Thank you very much. I see Umbuyiselo Bota is back on. Can you please continue in the interest of time? Bye. Over to you, Mbuyiselo.
Able to hear me now?
We seem to be having a challenge with
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can now.
Yeah. Just to start, when I started, were you able to hear me until, because suddenly it said I'd lost connection. I can't remember if were you able to hear all what I was saying?
If my recollection serves me well, you had started by commending Ilitha Labantu that has showed its bold strides as well as bravery by even daring all through pickets, marches, especially the one that you mentioned, the Take Back the Night march, that has always been facilitated by Ilitha Labantu in our townships.
Okay. No, thanks. Then I went on maybe to start by saying, having have said that, I thought, Sissy, that those actions that Ilitha Labantu had done were also very unconventional and non-traditional, because they were done in an atmosphere where people would not expect women in particular to walk in the streets of Cape Town at the height of violence. But having said that, one of the things that I want to talk about this afternoon is that the partnership between traditional leaders and Ilitha Labantu as a way of getting access in different in different initiation schools of different ethnic schools. I, I I want to argue that when we look at Libullo that Basotho do, or Komeng that Mapedi do, or Ugoluka that Xhosas do, these are very important spaces that Lilita must use in and to use a very strong word in infiltrating them, making sure that what is taught in those schools the Ilitha Labantu becomes or it influences the programs there and the teachings there, because unfortunately these are practices that are going to with us until cows come home. These are practices that we can ignore them at our own peril, but they are important because then these are spaces where young men, their understanding of manhood is integrated at a very early age, and they come out. Now, can one imagine the value that we could add as Ilitha Labantu in making sure that um, issues of anti-violence, of anti-femicide, or anti-partner violence, they are part and parcel of what is being taught in the traditional schools. It's going to go a long way to make sure that we reduce violence against women and children in our society. What has not happened, colleagues, is that there's not been a focused and a focused, deliberate in intervention or engagement with traditional leaders, because a lot of us um, have always dismissed traditional leaders as being non-important. But where I'm sitting, working in the sector, I think their value is important, but we have not had strategies of ensuring that we bring in teachings of anti-violence, of anti-femicide, of anti-sexual harassment, all of the work that Ilitha does. We have not been able, and in this instance, the whole country, we have not been able to say to in the different traditional houses of different provinces. But can you tell us what do we do to ensure that we integrate our teachings, our syllabuses of anti-violence, uh, of anti-femicide into what is being taught in those important teachings? Because traditional leaders, again, I want to repeat, they have boys they are raising, they have girls they are raising. I think that there's something in it for them when they have teachings of anti-violence, teachings of anti-femicide, because they would not want their own girls to be looked at as just objects, sexual objects, to be misused, to be disrespected, to be discarded. So there's something in it for traditional leaders, if for them to embrace programs that would create, if you like, a new man, programs that would create a young man when he comes out of any traditional school, be it Libullo, be it Komeng, Okoluka, all of them, they would be having one message, and that message would be anti-violence, anti-femicide. But what has happened and continues to happen in our country is that, as I said earlier, moderator, we have not been able to swim. We have not been able, both government programs Chapter 9 institutions, there has not been a concerted, sustainable, and I'm not talking about a flash in the pan where you would have 16 days, where you'd have March the 8th, where you'd have the Women's Month, but I'm talking about where we would know that we have programs that are funded, programs that are sustainable, programs that would be able to go back and say, when we engaged boys that came in, when we with the traditional leaders, when we trained them on strategies of anti-violence, where are they after a year? What has happened in their communities? Has there been any impact? And that has not happened throughout. I mean, in my years working in the sector, I've not seen programs that are designed, developed to make sure that they are only geared towards engaging traditional leaders, especially on how young boys are trained in becoming men or in their quest of being men in their communities. How are they trained? And that has not happened. I think that I've not heard. I think that government, it's important that together with Ilitha Labantu, to make sure that there are programs. Because what has happened, unfortunately, in our country is we always you're like firefighting. We get involved in such spaces when young boys have died because out of dehydration, because there's been a botched circumcision, because there's been one traditional healer or traditional surgeon who is not properly qualified, who's fake, who's after money, your different charlatans. The point I'm making is all of these people who take advantage in such schools because there may be a realization that your NGOs have not had or these programs, as I said, that are long term, these programs that you can even monitor them, that are geared specifically towards traditional schools. Kolibulong, Okolukweni, Kotabeng, all of these ethnic groups. And the beauty is that we already have what one would call established houses of traditional leaders. What we lack is how do we bring to bear our work and bring it into those spaces and make sure that traditional leaders become our allies. Traditional leaders become, in fact, our ambassadors. Traditional leaders, it is them who end up saying that, look, we're going towards June. There's going to be this intake of young boys. Sismandisa, with your group, can we have, because these are spaces that women would not be allowed to, can we have, in those spaces, can we have from your group men who might have gone through those passage of manhood themselves to come and train us as traditional leaders? Or they may not even go inside, but to say that can we have a memorandum of understanding between Ilitha Labantu and different house of traditional leaders, so that the house of traditional leaders are adequately trained, are adequately skilled, and they know that, look, we're going to be allies in making sure that no boy would come out there and become violent. No boy would come out there and think that the women bodies are but just a scene of crime. I thought that for me, it's going to be critical and in going forward that we really stop these practices. It may be difficult. The practices of ticking a box, we really stop them and we make sure that we develop sustainable long-term programs that would speak specifically to young men who undergo this important traditional practice. I will stop there.
Thank you very much to Mbuyisa Loboda. We are also requesting participants to start writing on the chat, questions as well as comments that are aimed at at all the panelists. We will be coming back to respond to that. Okay. We have in our midst Dr. Bridget Osakwe. who is a women, peace and security expert, gender, process facilitation, training, civil society coordination, with a master's degree in peace and reconciliation studies from the Coventry University in the United Kingdom, as well as a PhD in peace, conflict and development studies. Her resume is going on very much in detail, and she is quite interesting and in terms of the work that we have been doing, but we're not going to be going through it all. She is going to assist us also in terms of highlighting the critical points in relation to the work that she has been doing over many decades, because she's having over 25 years of work experience and established work purposes that are valuable professional contacts at governmental, community, global and civil society levels. I know that we're not doing justice to you, Dr. Bridget Osakwe, but I think we appreciate you in our midst and welcome you to this stage, as you have been working on the violence against women for several years, where you were in charge of information sharing on issues of violence against women and providing support services to female victims of violence, while also advocating for the protection of their rights. You have had talks, speeches, in different platforms, and we are welcoming you to this particular platform, where we're talking about the integration of both traditional and Western ways in terms of preventing GBV. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ilitha. Thank you, moderator, for doing that great job in introducing me. I have listened to other panelists and the perspective they bring. My contribution this afternoon is going to be centered around collaboration. There's a saying in my place that says that collaboration is what makes a water, a soup. When you put water on the fire, it is the collaboration of the pepper and the vegetable and everything that makes it into a soup. And so, collaboration of the traditional and the new media and now technology will give us a good soup in preventing gender-based violence. And so, I have listened to all the conversations around, and I align myself with all the conversations. But I want to take it from the strategies that we can use in addition to what we have said, or in my own perspective, starting from women getting into traditional structures of decision-making processes. Because along the line, we have seen that these cultural aspects of gender-based violence has devalued women. And it is about misogyny and the toxic masculinity that uses men's achievements to exonerate or excuse the impact of their behavior. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of women being in traditional structures. I take it on a personal basis. That's in my environment where you see the traditional councils of elders, for instance. Most times you see men around the table. So we think that a woman participating in that palace meeting gives opportunity for contribution to what goes on around. And in that sense, I have taking two traditional titles from the communities that I work. The first community that I work in, Calabar, gave me the traditional title of KMM, which means the mother of peace. And what this does is that it gives me an opportunity to sit with men in making decisions. And so each time that they are having conversation, oh, they will say, okay, Mama is here. What do you think? That process of what do you think gives me a good opportunity of making my own inputs and influencing their thought processes towards prevention of gender-based violence and letting them know the implications of some of the decisions that they are making or that they are likely to make. And another community that we have worked that gave me another traditional title in Enugu gives me that Wanyibulo. Wanyibulo just means that mother is a woman is the mother of home, and expatiates the usefulness of a woman in the family setting. And so what this does is that whenever they are seated to take critical decisions, whether I am there or not, they will remember that there's a woman here that will disagree with any decision that they take that is against women. And so most women may not have the opportunity that I have to be in the palace circle, but at times it is important that we deliberately aspire to be in those circles so that we can influence the decisions that happen around those circles. And then begin to interact with the men with what Mr. Bota was talking about, the involvement of young boys in reorientation of men on about masculinity and their behaviors within the communities. And I think that this is very crucial because when we talk about education in nonviolent or equality between men and women, here the men's alliance is very important. And when we are doing this education, we are not thinking about education in a very formal way, but in a traditional school system where people are taught in their own native thoughts, in their own native languages, with their thoughts line of how to understand the perception and the implications of what they are doing. And yes, it is important that we do campaigns and raise awareness. My awareness that I want to align with is when the first panelist, the social worker from Ilitha, was talking about what they are doing about those days, what was happening that have changed. So for me, I think that in raising awareness is promoting those positive cultural aspects that were done in those days. And the question I ask myself is, where did we begin to change and how did it begin to change? Those are the critical questions that we are interrogating in another level, because we see a change from what she was describing, that in those days, how men treat women or how women are treated within the environment, especially in the marriage setting. So I think we need to raise awareness on what was happening in those days and begin to question or challenge the emergence of these new attitudes of violence against women. Wherever it may be coming from, and however it is coming, we need to raise awareness on those emergencies. I have some examples from my own community. My own community, my uncle tells me that those days, if a man beats his wife, it is the neighbor that goes to report to the traditional head. And then the man will be challenged by his own age mates to a fight. In an open situation, they will tell him that it is, how can you go and be beating the woman? Come and beat a man like you. And then if he holds any traditional title, he is dethroned. And they make public ridicule of that person. But all this has changed now that you see men beating their wives and all that. So we need to reinvent and begin to activate such structures that existed before. And the last thing that I'm going to be talking about here is how to promote we women. How do we promote ourselves? In the light of or in the face of the numerous challenges that we have, in the face of limited decision-making powers that we have, right from the home, right from the community, how will women begin to get empowered? Because once experience have shown us that once women are empowered, their capacity to contribute to decision making, even in the family, increases. And so we need to continually seek to avenues to empower women to increase their economic positions and reduce their vulnerability to abuse. And we do know that this vulnerability exposes women to risk, and such risk includes sexual violence, unsafe working conditions, and all that. And so I think that all this put together should help us to increase the number of women to men in working environments. And I dare say that even in the traditional councils, the number of women should increase so that we continue to challenge stereotypes, we continue to promote positive traditional practices, and we continue to promote men who will support women in preventing violence against women. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Doctor. In our midst, as participants, we've got a range of countries that have representatives here. We have got participants from Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Malawi, Namibia, United States, Botswana, Zambia, Eswatini, and across South Africa and across different sectors. We are here to, strongly feeling that we need to start looking at the identification and promotion of integration of traditional practices with modern approaches in gender-based violence prevention and response. Secondly, this webinar is aimed at encouraging dialogue between traditional leaders and modern practitioners to find collaborative solutions, as the doctor has said, and also thirdly, to provide actionable insights and strategies for communities to adopt a hybrid approach to ending GBV. We need to get to a stage where we have a common understanding of the traditional practices, explore how traditional customs and practices can either hinder or support efforts to end GBV. We need to start having case studies of regions where traditional practices have been successfully harmonized with modern GBV interventions. Also, we need to start understanding the role of community leaders through engaging them, the elders, healers, in modern GBV prevention and support strategies. We need also to having an overview of evidence-based modern approaches to GBV, such as legal frameworks, psychological support, and community education programs. With the challenges and solutions, we need to start addressing potential conflicts between the traditional practices and modern approaches, and finding solutions that respect cultural norms whilst ensuring the safety and empowerment of women and girls. We need a path forward. By developing a roadmap for integrating traditional and modern practices in the fight against GBV with actionable strategies for community leaders, policymakers, and practitioners. The last panelist that we are inviting to the platform, it's Honorable Justice Zion Jane Veronica Ndaba, who is a judge of the High Court, who sits at the High Court in Zomba Registry in the Eastern Judicial Region, that is in Malawi. In her current role as a judge, she sits as an adjudicator in criminal and civil cases. Her work also includes policy and legislative analysis and advice when called to do so on the national platform. Her legal areas of interest are in the energy law, international law, constitutional law, human rights law, especially gender, children, and disability aspects. Before joining the bench, she joined the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs as Senior State Advocate, after which she was promoted to Principal State Advocate. But when she was leaving the ministry, she had been promoted to the position of Assistant Legislative Counsel. To mention but a few of her accolades, she also undertook a lot of legal advisory work as well as legal drafting in various aspects of the law. Judge Ndaba is actively involved as a member of the Women Judges Association of Malawi, focusing on bringing the courts closer to the people, aiming at legal empowerment of Malawians, especially women and children, and offering mentorship programs, to mention but a few. She is a keen facilitator and trainer on various aspects of the law, nationally and regionally. She is passionate about the development issues with an emphasis on women and child rights issues. Welcome to you, Judge, Honorable Judge Ndaba. Space is yours.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm being heard.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible. Thank you very much.
Mandisa, may I just ask how much time do I have so I can time myself?
Let's try 15 to 20 minutes. Okay.
Okay, I'll try to keep it to less, but let me start by saying that greetings from the warm heart of Africa, Malawi. If you're ever in town, please visit us. I live in a beautiful city called Zomba, which has a mountain next to it, and it's got a beautiful plateau. And we drink absolutely amazing fresh water because it's up from the mountain. It's spring water, and we have amazing fruits, and it's one of the best places to visit in Malawi as well. So come visit us. Now, having done that, I will concentrate my discussion with you on the work that I've done with women judges and how it correlates with the judiciary work that I do. Women Judges Association is a a grouping of women judges, that is both judges, magistrates, but it not only female ones, but we also are open to working with the female judicial officers and judges and magistrates who are also members of the Women Judges Association. Now, the work, when we say bringing the courts closer to the people, we understand that courts serve a lot of people that are underrepresented. They're vulnerable, they're marginalized, and they've been victims of violence or crime, whether sexual violence, gender-based violence in all its forms. So the work that we do is we recognize that judiciaries have a limited way of doing what we call legal empowerment. And legal empowerment means going into the field, going into spaces, going into the villages. Actually, we focus a lot more with villages as opposed to urban centers. We do some work within the urban centers, but we do a lot of our project work within the villages. So we do a lot of legal empowerment work whereby we will go into a village and ask a chief, for instance, to say, look, we would want to use your walo, which is like his day. He has days where a chief will call the people up to discuss issues. We'll say, we want to use your walo to come discuss this particular aspect of the law. And for that particular space, we will ask the chief to be available. We'll ask all service providers in that area, whether it's police, social services, hospitals, and civil society that are working in that space, faith-based organizations, and then we would also go in. And for the work that we do with the legal empowerment work and sometimes we also collaborate strategically with lawyers, especially female lawyers, with the Women Lawyers Association and the Gender Justice Unit. So we'll go into a space and say, look, for today, we're going to discuss 3 particular laws, especially in terms of how they relate to gender-based violence. So we could pick a topic in wills and inheritance, because women do get a lot of violence through wills and inheritance. There's a lot of property grabbing. There's a lot of even sometimes people being killed because they inherited from a person. So we would say wills and inheritance, and we would say, okay, we'll tackle the penal code, which talks about the sexual violence itself, and assault. So women judges or a lawyer will talk about what the law says. And then we'll ask the service providers to actually talk about their role in that, in eradicating or ensuring that victims of violence are given assistance. And at the end of the day, we also will ask the chief to also give feedback as to what is going on within his village, and then we'll give it out to the people to actually have discussion and talk about the issues that are happening in the space. After that particular work that we do with the women, with the Balo, we set up what we call a legal clinic with the women lawyers that would have gone with on that particular day. And sometimes even if we didn't go with the women lawyers, it would be the members. So they would take on one-on-one discussions with people that are there that want to seek legal advice or want referrals. To either a lawyer or to other services like social services or economic empowerment. And from that space, that's where some of the legal work comes through. But sometimes that space is also used as counseling spaces for the women that actually do not get counseling. So there would be some first aid counseling, so to speak, for the people that come through. But what is significant about these spaces is the fact that before we go into the space itself, the chief has to be able to be part of the process, because we know in a lot of spaces, sometimes the chief could be the problem, and sometimes they actually, in other spaces, they're the champions. By us coming there and telling people the law, and also highlighting in that space where we know sometimes most times would have done our research and to know what the chief is, an ally or not an ally, but we'll still use the chief because we want everybody to come to this particular meeting or to come to the Walo. The most significant aspect is that when we decide to talk about the laws and the rights and the rights that people have and the responsibilities that people have, if a chief is being the one who is perpetrating violence or also condoning violence, we at that particular moment as women judges having the powers that we have, we will discuss and say, even if it's your chief that is doing this, the law requires that he does this. If he doesn't, you can report him to police, you can report him to the Ministry of Local Government, you can report him to the DC that he is violating people's rights, especially women's rights or children's rights in this area. So that is a significant aspect of the Walo. The second significant aspect of the Walo is that once the chief is there and he has also gotten the message and has been inculcated into this message, he is able to take it on to further Walos when he has his own Walos during other days. The fourth thing that we do with traditional leaders is that when we do what we call capacity building, so we believe in working with local grassroots level. So we work with both grassroots and national level civil society. So when we have a particular capacity building on something like human rights, counseling and what, we would tell our strategic partner, which is a grassroots women's organization in the village. For instance, like in Machinga, would work with the Machinga Women's Forum that is found in most of the village. The women gather together at the Machinga Women's Forum and say, look, we want 2 or 3 chiefs that should come to you when we're going to discuss this particular capacity building so that can be capacitated. Sometimes it will be a training on child marriage, because child marriage is also a big issue in terms of our country. We still have a lot of child marriages that are happening through. And then we'll ask and say, look, can we have chiefs? Can we have faith-based organization leaders come through to this training so that they are part of the process? As you're being trained on this particular issue, they are also being trained so they understand. So that's the kind of work we've been doing with traditional leaders. One of the other things that we encourage our traditional leaders, because we don't have enough the amount of infrastructure that we need. A lot of traditional leaders will say, okay, we'll use our homes as safe spaces. So the issue is to say, when you talk about a safe space, what are you providing? How are you providing it? And what are the elements of the issues that you are providing? And how then do you still continue to ensure that these women are protected after they leave your space? Because they can't stay in your house for more than maybe a week, or they can't stay for a long time. And when you work in the village setting, you realize that, or in traditional spaces, you realize that the lack of resources is our major problem, because it's the inability for them to have services near, because they're very far. So the health center will be far. So social welfare will be far. The victim support unit will not be also available. But we luckily also will work with what they call community victim support units, which are trained by police officers. But when we come into doing a project or doing some work in that area, we will retrain those community victim support units to be gender responsive, disability responsive, and age responsive. In that, we go beyond what we call awareness of these people, of understanding what it means to be gender aware, because some awareness is not enough. We need them to respond to the issues. So if a woman comes and says, I'm being beaten, and my husband doesn't want to leave my house, I need assistance. It's not the issue of saying, okay, I've heard you, but you understand we have nowhere else to take you. Responsiveness means looking around their village and finding referral spaces to say, look, I can't help you because we don't have a shelter, but this hospital might help you for a day, or this church offers this kind of services. So the referral aspect of the responsiveness of making sure that you can refer a person that you can't assist or help. What we've also realized in this work that we're doing is that a lot of times these babalos are the first time a lot of women and girls, or even men who've been subjected to gender-based violence, get to understand what their rights are, or what actual violence is. Because sometimes we've gotten so used to the system that you don't realize that this is violence, because not all the time is violence physical, it's emotional, it's financial. So and psychological. So all those things, those elements of empowering women, empowering girls, empowering people, even men at times, then you realize that women then start realizing that, oh, in order for me to seek help, I need to do this. In order for me to seek help, I need to do that. And because also we have social welfare brings in the social aspect, but they also highlight the concept of economic empowerment, which is something a lot of times when you're doing work within the gender-based violence space needs to always be highlighted, because women, it's not enough that they take the criminal aspect of the work of their problem, but they also do the economic empowerment, because every time you take out a husband who is sexually molesting a stepchild, you find that the woman is coming to court and saying, I want to withdraw the matter because we are suffering as women. So we believe in the concept of being strategic in the way we work, and in ensuring that if we're going to ask women to report, then they should be able, after they report, to still be able to survive and look after themselves in the space that they found themselves in because of that reporting. And if it's the woman herself, in terms of she's reported her husband who's been beating her up, what are the resources available for her to start either being economically empowered? Because we know as women judges, we don't have the resources, but our best resource is the referral and working with the strategic partners that are particularly available in that district. So a lot of our work does require a lot of mapping of services that are available in that area to ensure that when we start work in that area, it's not work that just will cut at the legal space. It has to go beyond the legal space, but that must go as well to the economic space. It also must go to the social space, and must also go to the psychosocial, because a lot of women do need those services once they have been a victim of gender-based violence. I wanted to highlight some work also done with Gender Justice Unit. Gender Justice Unit works a lot in the peri-urban space as well as the rural areas. They do a lot of work with traditional leaders as well. So they do a lot of capacity building. So we partner with them as WOJAB to do a lot of their capacity building, especially for chiefs, for them to understand what the laws are saying, also what the issues are in their villages, but also to just highlight to them the kind of problems that they need to start facing and the opportunities that they have to actually speak about these things, whether it's at a funeral, whether it's a market day, whether it's a wallow, how they can use those spaces themselves to actually ensure that the concept of the rights of people are protected, the rights of women and girls are promoted in their areas, and that way, and also highlight what needs to happen if those rights have been violated. So that's the kind of work that we've been doing so far with WOJA. But what I want to highlight is one thing, that after we do the Babalos and the legal empowerment work, there's a very strategic aspect of work that we do, which is, as I said, bringing courts closer to the people. We actually take a whole court to that village where we went to, and take up the cases that are within that space. So a magistrate will go, a judge will go and sit, whether it's in a church. We've sat in churches, we've sat under trees, we've sat in schools, we've sat in a little kiosk, like a little grocery in those spaces, to actually hear cases. And this is not just the criminal cases, but the civil cases like divorce, maintenance, custody, guardianship, all those kind of cases, which are also a very big part of gender-based violence, but a lot times people concentrate on the criminal space as opposed to the civil space. But you do find that a lot of women are suffering because of no child maintenance, no support, no custody issues are not known, and wills and inheritance issues are part of the space. So those particular mobile courts most times are open. They open courts, so it means everybody can attend. And sometimes we will choose a market day for that particular reason, so that people can come and listen to these particular cases. I will share a picture of a mobile court where a lot of men had come to that court, because that week we had been doing what we call child maintenance cases, where fathers who had not been maintaining their child were taken to task. And what we've discovered with those mobile courts is that they have also acted as an advocacy tool, that people come to courts, even that civil court, and say, if I don't take care of my children, this woman will drag me into court and I will have to pay. And the ability for them to understand that they could also be arrested for not paying child maintenance is something that's significant, because the magistrate or the person or the judge who goes there will emphasize that when they are finally deciding on what child maintenance should be paid and what happens if a person does not pay that child maintenance. So the work that we've been doing for the last 5-6 years has centered around those particular areas of law and areas of work in terms of gender-based violence or sexual offenses. And the last one I would say is we do mentoring programs.
Noma nimbone khona sendlini kodwa
Sorry, somebody is speaking. Sorry, the last one is the mentoring work. That mentoring work is done within the judiciary itself with other female judicial officers, but we also do a lot with the schools, secondary schools and primary schools. And with those primary schools, what we also do is we go and encourage women, girls a lot more, but we also do include boys to actually take up spaces in this particular role. So we'll go together with other professionals like accountants and that, just to encourage. But part of that process also is legal empowerment work. So we will talk to girls about what their rights are, what violations are. And from those mentoring talks, we've also received cases themselves. And we usually do this kind of talks. We do concentrate on both urban and rural, but we have a bigger focus on the rural areas because they don't have a lot of access to such services. So that's the kind of work that we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. We have in our midst also as participants in this platform, a representative from Germany. One of the things that we have noted, with the different participants, we have seen that there are brothers here, the men that are part of this group, whom we know that they are very gender sensitive and are not ashamed of actually sharing their views on this topic that seems to be a controversial one in some quarters. I saw Advocate Mugaitobi in having attended. If you would love to say anything before I give over to you, Joan. And also there are a number of men that are here. Can you, by a show of hands, just so if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question before we are going to be directing questions to the panelists. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chairperson and the moderator, for such accolades. I may be having misrepresented as an advocate Ngwaitobi. Rather, I'm Lulama Ngwaitobi. I'm resident in the Eastern Cape, and we have got a foundation NPO that runs some programs in the rural outskirts of the Eastern Cape in South Africa, promoting gender-sensitive programs and fighting against the gender-based violence as just part of a small, humble contribution around this. And we're working together with Advocate Ngwaitobi that we have spoken about, who is my brother. Now, I came just to participate in this particular platform, also to get an insights from various specialists and experts in this particular item, which is very prevalent, unfortunately, in our areas. I share sentiments from Mr. Mbuyiselo and other expert people that have spoken already about this. As such, I was trying to write something in the platform that is provided for this. So thanks very much for just acknowledging my presence, and we wish the discussion a better success and probably an expression that we are also part of the whole set up to fight against this particular crisis. which has a very big sketch in South Africa. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you very much. Is there any other comment before we move on to direct questions to the panelists that we have picked up from the chat group? Okay. Coming back to the discussions of today, there are critical matters that have, brought in some interest in terms of this culture that we have to be talking about. Sorry about that, okay. The issue of getting to understand the traditional practices versus Western ways of dealing with issues around gender-based violence seem to bring about a challenge of having to have a new narrative regarding what is traditional, what is cultural, when it comes to us dealing with GBV. We need to get to understand which traditional practices are anti-gender-based violence and which of these practices seem to be misconstrued to mean abuse and mete out violence against women and children. We also need to start looking at the training of traditional leaders. What part of the traditional leadership should we be engaged with? Because at leadership levels, you will find that there are platforms that are structured in terms of meeting chiefs and headmen. The other layers of leadership, how do we get them to them in order for them to also to start changing their mindsets? Issues that have been raised by the panelists is that when did things start to change in the treatment of women? Because previously, there was a lot of the culture of neighborliness, where a husband abusing the wife physically, the neighbors would reprimand the person. There is also the issue around inheritance as well as custody of children. When it comes to a practice that also brings about a lot of sexual abuse to those women who do not want ukungenwa, where the younger brother or a family member, when a person becomes a widow, it is insisted that that person should get married there because they want to keep the property as well as the family name, within the same family. How much importance do we give to such issues? There is also, from the chat groups, the issue of circumcision that has been mentioned, whether it is for boys or girls, but that is also another platform there where you find that there is a lot of abuse, there is a lot of violence that is experienced. So for us, to the panelists, if we can start building, a foundation or a platform where we have to ensure about the integration of the two different approaches, put some meaning to those traditional practices without forsaking or violating any rights. We also need to start looking at where do we put in, the importance of the legal prescripts when it comes to the practices of traditional houses traditional leaders and cultural practices by society. We'll welcome any panelists to actually comment and respond to that. Whilst we are requesting some questions and comments from the participants. Okay.
Can I go first on the question that's in the chat box for me? It says, do we have a Maintenance Act? Yes, we do. We changed our laws and put them all together. We used to have maintenance on its own and the marriage one on its own. We now have what we call the Marriage, Divorce, and Family Relations Act, which encompasses the issues on maintenance. And then the Child Care Justice Protection Act, as well as the Constitution, has moved the age of a child to 18. But the Child Care Justice Act, Child Care Justice Protection Act says a child you might move that age of 18 upwards, depending on at the level of the child. If the child is still at school, you could move it to 21 to 23, depending on those circumstances. And a child can be still considered a child being supported for that particular purposes. But under the law, generally under the Constitution, a child is the one that is under the age of 18. With the work that I was talking about, those legal clinics, the legal empowerment clinics, also tackle the traditional practices. So, for instance, we used to have a traditional practice called chokolo, which is the wife inheritance. That doesn't exist anymore. It was the Constitution says anything that's repugnant to the Constitution, that takes away women's rights, abuses them after inheritance, then those practices should not be allowed. Furthermore, we have a law nowadays on deceased estates. It's called the Deceased Estates Wills and Inheritance Protection Act as well, which has actually changed the whole concept of our customary law of inheritance. That if you know how if your father died, it was his mother and his siblings who inherited more than you as a family. The new law has taken that completely out and says, if a person dies, for instance, they are married, and it will be the spouse and the children who inherit. If those are not available, then it will be the parents and the siblings who can inherit. But it does also recognize that there is polygamy in our society. So if you had two wives, then it means both wives would inherit, and children of those wives would inherit. It also has taken. We have also some. What we've realized about traditional practices or culture, so to speak, is they're both evolving and dynamic. And one of the things that we've even heard when we're doing the training and the capacity building with traditional leaders is we try to interrogate what those traditional practices were meant to do. For instance, one of the things that we always interrogate is the concept of polygamy in our society. Is why did polygamy come into play? Was it because you wanted to abuse the first wife or not? And the chiefs were saying, no, polygamy was meant to enhance and build the family. So if, for instance, if a woman could not give birth and they didn't want to go outside, the man didn't want to use a surrogate for it or any other, he would take on a second wife if the wife was the one failing to give birth, but he could. So they would take a second wife to bring them in. So the issue for us is also to interrogate these cultural practices and how they evolved, so that when we say, look, the law says you cannot do this anymore, it's because those practices have stopped being the concept of protection practices and have now gone to being abusive. But some practices were originally abusive in their very nature as opposed to anything else. And those ones, we keep going back to the Constitution and saying, look, we are a rule of law country. We agreed that we are going to be bound by the Constitution. And the Constitution says human rights are these. And one of the biggest issues about human rights is you have a right to culture. You have a right to these traditional practices. But if they are repugnant to the human rights aspect, the right to life, right to privacy, right to protection of children, rights of women, then you cannot practice those particular provisions. So it's that capacity building. It's a process for us, because we've been doing this for I've been doing it since I was in the Ministry of Justice, and I've continued to do it. I noticed that you need to continuously go back and remind people about what the law is saying and what human rights are saying. But also, one of the things that we've actually incorporated now with our discussion in these trainings is the concept of what somebody talked about, Ubuntu here. We talk about Ubuntu here in Malawi. The concept that any practice that takes away a person's dignity and humanity is something that as human beings we should abhor and we should get away from. So those are the things that we're trying to concentrate on in these discussions we have with our traditional leaders on practices and culture. Thank you.
Anything from your side, Nomcebo?
Yes, number two, just on the traditional healers in terms of how they work when it comes to addressing issues of gender-based violence. As we have all seen in South Africa, there's a huge number of traditional healers that exist. And I, through research, have found out that in 2003, the Council of Traditional Healers implemented a certificate, some sort of a formality to say that only the authentic and the real, really talented traditional healers should practice. So I think for us, when it comes to roping in traditional practices, it's important that we work with people who have the certificate that shows that they are approved within the Traditional Healers Council. And we're also looking at the cultures, the practice of culture. It's very important that we nitpick, because not all of the traditional cultures that were practiced in the olden days where we're teaching men and boys to disrespect women. So we need to nitpick and have a look at the traditional practices that promoted self-respect, that promoted respect for women, and try educate it in the modern approaches in the modern society, to say back in the days this is how it worked. These are the things that were implemented and they actually work. So therefore they should be re-educated in schools, re-educated in awarenesses that we go to in communities. So I think that's the best way we can ensure that we rope in culture whilst not going against human rights.
Any comment from you, Dr. Bridget? Okay. Mbuyiselo, is there any response that you would have, a practical example of how the integration can be done, you know, between the Western and traditional and cultural ways of doing things, and how it can be incorporated in the legislative frameworks, so that we start looking at the roadmap that is being suggested to be started in order to transform the mindsets of men who are still stuck on cultural and traditional ways of doing things, and looking at how best can the awareness be created that is going to be leading to transformative ways of doing things.
Nutu. I'm sure there's a connectivity issue, but I see Mambatabili's hand is up.
Okay, over to you, Batabile. Hey.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. This, when I looked at this subject, I thought it was easy. But the more I thought about, I found it difficult. And the first thing I thought about was the instrument that South Africa is a signatory of, which is CEDAW. And CEDAW in it's dealing with the issues of violence against women and girls, acknowledges that this remains pervasive and we should not undermine it. And I think is very, very important, because some of the things we undermine, and because of the way they are rooted and persistent, and we end up accepting them as part of our lives. So I'm grateful to Ilitha for making us to think thoroughly or carefully about this issue, but also integrating traditional practices that empower communities with modern approaches is very important, because most of the time when there are these international instruments, we then work or look above the heads of communities and do not want to adopt positive traditional practices, because there are positive traditional practices and there are negative traditional practices. So CEDAW emphasizes the need for state parties to take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination against women, including violence. And this tool urges state parties or countries to adopt laws that protect women, and that these laws must be defended from the ground. And I like the approach of Malawi, of working with all stakeholders, working with all communities, so that we don't just speak about issues that communities have not been part of. And the second issue that I would like to talk to is the issue of the Beijing conference. And Beijing conference went deep into the issues of women's rights, but also it is African women that that brought the issue of the girl child into the thematic areas that were discussed there. And also in its approach, it is highlighting the importance of communities and also involvement of communities in crafting solutions that honor cultural contexts while rejecting harmful practices. And this is very clear. Everyone understands there is violence against women and children, but also we are being made aware of that we will not be able to fight this if we just think we're going to have laws and not bounce them with traditional leaders and our community leaders, but not only bound with community leaders, but also ensuring that our laws start from the ground upwards. The problem mainly is that our systems are hierarchical. And then if we use a system that should involve everyone, can really become better. I think I've said much. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. From the chat group, we have picked up, you know, from Ukolile that there is an issue that needs to be addressed in terms of accessibility to transport, telecommunications, as well as information to all, which has to be ensuring that awareness is created at different points, at different corners of society. Ulona has also raised the issue around accessibility of such platforms to people living with disability. And she was highlighting the issue of the Braille, you know, the use of Braille as a means of communication so that all sectors are actually included in the actual reading of information that is out there to create awareness and creating an opportunity for one to learn about what options one does have if and when affected and impacted on by gender-based violence. The other group has been requesting information regarding availability of the recording of this particular webinar. So, Siku, I don't know whether you can respond to that.
Yes, the webinar is available both on our website, also on our Facebook page, where you will have access to the video itself, and also on our YouTube channel. So search Ilitha Labantu throughout our social networks, and you'll be able to find today's recording and the previous webinar.
Is there any other hand that might not be seeing? And to the panelists right now.
Sorry, ma'am, there's one Upolile, Josie, has their hand up. I will ask them to. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Over to you, Kolile. I can see.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Polile Nzoyi from Gugulethu Township in South Africa, Cape Town. Also part of what is called Iteba Walkway, which is what we normally called in our township a laneway or a hanga. So it's an initiative that comprises of different organizations that seeks to make a better narrative or a very good narrative about that space due to the fact that of its past notorious undertakings, because subject to this reality in terms of relevancy, of the subject. That space also, 2000, a young woman, was brutally murdered by his better half. So I think for me, it's highly relevant for me also to engage on this matter that also seeks to condemn such acts and beyond. But also I want to also to cement this issue of saying how critical for us to have this engagement, how critical for us to continue to engage, how critical for us continue to be a group of people or a group of society that seeks to talk about matters that condemn violence against women, better be in urban, better be in rural, or all over globally. But I think organizations like Ilitha Labantu must also be recommended. You must be commended in terms of their good work, and many other organizations. But also I want to say, really, rural areas are also a key fundamental on this matter, due to the fact that most of them, there are still some don't have access to what is it that we have. For example, now we are using this platform of Zoom, but I know that the youth of Emalungeni and Heleni, where it is deep rural of Emampondweni, where such problems probably may emanate of gender-based violence, in which I will hope that one day Ilitha Labantu will create such platform, will able to engage the leadership of the kings and the traditional leaders as well, the youth there, so they're able to understand the importance of this matter, and also to encourage also not only traditional leaders to attend on these matters, but also even those that are belonging to political party organizations, so that when they are constituted their forums or platform, they must not only discuss about leadership, but also discuss these social matters. Be that you are a politician, but at the end, you are a human being. So I'm very much happy, but also to say, let's not only use platform like this, but also let's use mural, let's use public spaces where openly, where we use other forms of engaging and use awareness in different forms, because others are not best in terms of attending workshops or conferences or meetings, because sometimes abantu bakuthi, they have this saying, no, that platform is relevant for you, Kolile, not for us, unless that you can attend that particular forum and then report to us. So that's what I'm saying. We need to be innovative, very creative, and very smart, and use other forms that may exist in society now, where we can able to spread the message, because whatever that we say today, we will maybe tomorrow hear there's another problem of similar environment. But also, I want to say also to all these individuals that are here, let's continue this journey of condemning this problem that is existing in this country, but also involving all those that are in decision making. Let's discuss these matters. It must not be a matter of non-governmental organizations, but it must be a matter of society at large. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Kolile. As Ilitha Labantu is busy with a program where it is setting up a women's hub on women, on African women's history, to Malawi, to every other country that is actually here. It would be, you know, a very appreciated gesture where you can share with us some stories, some case studies on the experiences in dealing with traditional practices, as well as how you working towards transformation, because there is information that we can actually use to teach and facilitate more sessions of engagement with future generations. Just a few seconds to each panelist to say a few words in closing, okay?
All right. Let me share one thing that I wanted to share. You talked about communication transport and all those things. One of the things that I think COVID has taught us, and this is something that we've seen a lot, is the use of technology to bridge that justice divide that we actually have. And it is the most interesting that even when you get into the villages, you have people who have WhatsApp. I've had cases where dealt with cases where people couldn't attend court, but they attended through WhatsApp because the court allowed it for court to happen through a WhatsApp call or whether it was a normal call, just a regular call, a voice call, or a video call where people did call into court via WhatsApp. And I think it is important that a part of this work that we do, especially for legal empowerment, is to use these resources, use the phones, because also the phones are used to push so many messages. All our health messages are pushed through the phones. So getting our service providers to actually also try to, this is our communication service providers, to try to do some co-research responsibility on, pushing messages that say, look, protect rights, eradicate traditional practices that are harmful. So it's something that I think we need to also continuously consider doing. One of the best practices I think that we've seen where traditional practices are actually, have worked is, I used to be what we call World Vision child marriage ambassador, and in that forum it was myself, the Inspector General of Police, and then we had 4 paramount chiefs. So we had paramount chief from up the north, we had Ngoni paramount chief, then we had a woman paramount chief, and another paramount chief from down the south. Working with these people and traditional leaders, we also had we had faith-based leaders, reverends and all that. Working with these people to interrogate, but also to actually just tell people that culture itself is not abusive, but also that women must be protected, children must be protected, was one of the best works that I can highlight as being one of the things that I've seen is a good case study. Using the same traditional leaders to teach other traditional leaders, but to also be role models nationally on these issues about gender-based violence. And we had chosen one particular topic, which was child marriage. And I think it's something that ultimately, at the end of the day, it's something that I look forward to continue to work with. But I think it's also something that traditional practices can best be highlighted, gotten rid of by the same people that are the holders, which are the traditional leaders themselves. They must be able to be at the forefront to speak out. So that's one thing I can say in closing. Thank you.
Okay. Judge Ndaba?
Yes?
Any closing remark?
My closing remark is that when we talk about gender-based violence and ensuring that traditional practices or culture does not increase it, but the best thing is to use the same traditional practices to help eradicate and reduce incidences of gender-based violence. I always believe, I go back to I think it was Sister Mini, she said, there are so many good traditional practices that are out there. The fact that the law exists is quite good, but traditional practices or culture itself is also part of our customary law. And it is important that we use customary law that promotes and protects human rights to actually address eradicating gender-based violence. And for me, that's, I think, a very big thing that we need to always consider, that there are good customary law. There's good customary law that actually promotes and protects women and girls' rights and protects people from gender-based violence. Those will be my end words. Thank you.
Nomcebo, any last comment?
My last comments, number 2, would be to say that we all have a role to play. Social workers, community leaders, traditional leaders, and teachers, everybody that is involved in terms of ensuring that there's development in our society. And in that, we should always respect one another's approaches. There's no approach that is better than the other. And ensure that we work together to change the narrative and reinvent the wheel when it comes to inclusivity and inclusive approaches to ending gender-based violence.
Okay. Buiselo, any last word from you? Can I ask Ella just to say a few words and we close the.
Oh, thank you, Madam Moderator. I see Mandisa was also on, but I wanted to quickly respond to Lindelwa Tunjwa. Lindelwa, it's true. I think one of the most ignored cries is the one that is actually coming from the Deaf Society in terms of reporting cases of GBV. I do admit that. And I think what we have done as an organization to try and mitigate some of those challenges, we actually trained all our staff members. It's not much, but it was about a 3 to 4 month course on sign language to try and mitigate that particular gap. So if you still having a challenge, please feel free to reach out to us, but we will try by all means to support and assist in that particular case. Thank you for that question. Firstly, I would like to say thank you to all our speakers. Thank you very much for all your contributions. And I think Madam Ndaba will be reaching out to you as well, as we have an upcoming international conference. And I know that Sarai introduced you to us by intention. It was intentional that we meet, but via the internet. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Bridget all the way in Nigeria. Thank you very much to Nomthebo. And definitely thank you very much to our Madam Moderator, our participants. Thank you for being patient. I know today's technology has given us a bit of a headache, the on and off, but thank you so much to everyone. Thank you to our founder, because she's the one who sits tirelessly at night and researches these critical topics and actually try and scrutinize the gaps as much as we are providing a service, but there are always gaps within the system. So thank you very much to her. Thank you very much to Siko, our technician. We do appreciate you. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Good day.
Bye.
Enkosi, into entle.